The room was eerily quiet except for the faint ticking of the wall clock, each second hammering into Maya's chest like a countdown to a disaster she could sense but couldn't yet see. She sat alone in the living room, her fingers gripping the edge of the sofa as she stared at her phone. The last message she sent remained unanswered, and the blue ticks felt like a haunting reminder of the double life she had been living for months. Maya was 33, married for nearly a decade to Armin, the kind of man women described as too good to be true. He was dependable, kind, and, above all, utterly devoted to her. They had met in their early 20s, and their love story had been the envy of everyone around them. But love stories, Maya often thought, had a strange way of becoming routine. Their life had become predictable: dinners at the same restaurants, vacations to the same destinations, and conversations that revolved around bills, groceries, and what to watch on TV. She had tried to shake the monotony, but each attempt seemed to fall flat. Armin's stability, once comforting, began to feel suffocating. It started innocently enough, Maya's old college friend reappearing through a random social media message. They reminisced, laughed about shared memories, and then slowly, almost imperceptibly, their chats turned into something more. Zion was everything Armin wasn't: spontaneous, exciting, and wildly unpredictable. He made her feel alive again. She told herself it was harmless, just a bit of attention she needed to remind herself she was still desirable. But late-night messages turned into secret coffee dates, and before she realized it, Maya had crossed a line she swore she never would. She became someone she didn't recognize, a woman lying to her husband, sneaking around, and ignoring the gnawing guilt that grew louder with every meeting. Maya often wondered if Armin noticed the changes. He didn't question her late returns or the way she now clutched her phone as though her life depended on it. But Armin wasn't oblivious. He was just calculating, quietly observing. Their home, once a place of comfort, now felt like a stage where every interaction was part of a carefully rehearsed act. Maya would laugh a little too loudly at dinner, overcompensate with affection, and avoid eye contact when Armin asked simple questions like, "How was your day?" One evening, as they sat across from each other at the dining table, Maya felt his gaze linger on her for just a moment too long. "Everything okay?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Armin smiled, a small, inscrutable smile. Of course. Why wouldn't it be? His tone was calm, his words benign, but something about his expression sent a chill down her spine. As days turned into weeks, Maya's secret life began to unravel in small, insidious ways. She found herself unable to enjoy Zion's company the way she once had. Every touch, every whispered word, felt tainted by the weight of what she was risking. Yet, she couldn't stop. Zion had become an addiction, a reprieve from the ordinariness of her marriage. One evening, as she prepared for what she told Armin was a work dinner, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Her reflection startled her. The woman staring back looked tired, older, and burdened. For a moment, she considered canceling, coming clean to Armin, and trying to salvage the life they had built together. But then her phone buzzed, a message from Zion. "Can't wait to see you." The guilt was quickly replaced by a rush of adrenaline, and Maya pushed her doubts aside. She grabbed her bag and left, not noticing the way Armin watched her through the window as she drove away. Armin, sitting in the shadows, sipped his tea slowly. His face was unreadable, but his mind was racing. For weeks, he had been piecing things together. The odd excuses, the late nights, the way Maya had started avoiding him in the most subtle ways. He had seen the texts, the calls, the name that appeared a little too often on her phone. Armin didn't confront her, not yet. He believed in patience, in strategy. If Maya was playing a game, she didn't yet realize she was playing against someone who never lost. That night, as Maya sat across from Zion at a dimly lit cafe, laughing at one of his jokes, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, Armin's name flashing. Her stomach dropped. "I'll call him later," she muttered, silencing the phone. But the unease lingered, her laughter more forced now. Back home, Armin sat at the kitchen table, his untouched dinner growing cold. His mind was calm, his plan already forming. He wasn't angry, at least, not in the traditional sense. Anger was messy, impulsive. What Armin felt was something far more dangerous. He wanted revenge, and he wanted it to hurt. Maya's phone vibrated on the bedside table in the dead of night, pulling her out of a restless sleep. She instinctively reached for it, her heart racing as she glanced at the screen. It was Zion. "Miss you. Can't stop thinking about tonight." Her breath hitched as she quickly locked the phone and turned her back to Armin, who lay still beside her. She listened intently for any change in his breathing, hoping he was asleep. But Armin wasn't sleeping. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. He didn't need to check her phone to know who the message was from. He had seen enough. The next morning, the air in their home was heavy with unspoken tension. Maya tried to act normal, but her movements were hurried, her voice overly cheerful. She kissed Armin on the cheek before leaving for work, not noticing the way he stiffened under her touch. As soon as the door closed behind her, Armin sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. He had already made a fake social media account the week before, one Zion had unknowingly accepted as a friend. Armin now had access to Zion's public posts and interactions, piecing together his world. His jaw tightened as he scrolled through a picture Zion had posted, his arm draped casually around Maya's shoulders at what seemed to be a party. The caption read, "With someone who makes the world brighter." Armin stared at the screen for a long moment before forwarding the image to his private email. He didn't feel rage. He felt a cold, calculated determination. Maya's unease grew over the next few days. Armin was unusually quiet, his mood unreadable. He still smiled at her, still asked how her day was, but there was something about his tone that made her stomach twist. She tried to tell herself she was imagining things, that her paranoia was a reflection of her own guilt. But the doubts festered, especially after she noticed small changes in Armin's behavior. He had started coming home earlier than usual, spending more time in their shared space instead of his office. Once, she caught him glancing at her phone while it sat charging on the counter. When she asked him about it, he smiled and said, "Just checking if it was mine. We have the same cover." It was a plausible enough excuse, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling that he knew something. The first confrontation came unexpectedly. Maya was preparing dinner one evening when Armin walked into the kitchen, his phone in hand. He placed it on the counter and leaned against the fridge, watching her silently for a moment before speaking. "Who's Zion?" Maya froze, the knife slipping from her hand onto the cutting board. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to process his question. "What?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I said, who's Zion?" Armin repeated, his tone calm but unyielding. She scrambled for an answer, her mind racing. "Oh, he's just an old college friend. We reconnected recently." "Why?" Armin tilted his head, studying her. "An old friend? You've been spending a lot of time with him, haven't you?" Maya felt the walls closing in around her. "It's nothing like that," she said quickly. "We just caught up a few times over coffee. That's all." Armin didn't respond immediately. He picked up his phone, tapped the screen a few times, and turned it toward her. The image of her and Zion at the party stared back at her, her laughter frozen in time. "Coffee? Huh," he said, his voice still eerily calm. Maya's hands trembled as she tried to come up with an explanation. It wasn't. "You don't have to explain," Armin interrupted, placing the phone back on the counter. "I just wanted to know how long you planned on lying to me." The weight of his words hit her like a freight train. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Armin turned and walked out of the kitchen without another word, leaving her standing there, her world crumbling around her. Over the next few days, Armin's demeanor became colder, more distant. He no longer asked how her day was or kissed her goodnight. He began sleeping in the guest room, a decision he didn't explain. Maya felt like a stranger in her own home, her guilt consuming her. She tried to reach out to him, to apologize, but every attempt was met with silence. Once, she found him sitting in the living room, staring at the photo of their wedding day. She sat down beside him, tears streaming down her face. "Armin, please. I made a mistake. I'm so sorry," she whispered. He looked at her, his expression blank. "A mistake," he said quietly. "A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill or losing your keys. What you did wasn't a mistake, Maya. It was a choice." His words cut deep, and Maya realized that no apology would ever be enough. Meanwhile, Zion began to notice Maya pulling away. Their meetings became less frequent, her texts shorter and less enthusiastic. One evening, as they sat in his car outside her house, he asked her what was wrong. "It's Armin," she admitted. "I think he knows." Zion frowned, his hand resting on hers. "If he knows, then leave him. Be with me." Maya shook her head. "It's not that simple, Zion. You don't understand. He's not reacting the way I thought he would. He's so calm. It's like he's planning something." Zion scoffed. "What's he going to do? He's probably just in shock. Don't let him manipulate you into staying in a dead marriage." But Maya couldn't shake the feeling that Armin wasn't the type to let things go easily. Armin, on the other hand, was deep in preparation. He had reached out to a private investigator weeks earlier, gathering everything he needed to confirm his suspicions. The investigator had delivered a file filled with pictures, texts, and details about Maya's secret meetings with Zion. But Armin wasn't interested in confronting her again. He wanted her to feel the full weight of what she had done. His revenge had to be precise, deliberate, and devastating. One evening, as Maya returned home from work, she found a single envelope on the dining table. Her name was written on it in Armin's familiar handwriting. With trembling hands, she opened it and pulled out a series of photographs. Pictures of her and Zion at various places, smiling, laughing, holding hands. Beneath the photos was a single note. "I hope it was worth it." Word count, 1,400. Maya sat frozen at the dining table, the photographs spread out before her like pieces of a shattered mirror reflecting the life she had desperately tried to conceal. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts, and her hands trembled as she clutched the note. "I hope it was worth it." The words echoed in her mind like a taunt, their simplicity masking the depth of Armin's betrayal. No, not betrayal, retribution. She heard the front door open and close, the sound of Armin's footsteps growing louder as he entered the room. He was calm, as always, his face unreadable as he walked past her and poured himself a glass of water. "Armin," she began, her voice cracking. I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," he interrupted, his tone flat. He leaned against the counter, sipping his water as he studied her. "You've said enough with your actions." Tears welled up in her eyes. "Please, Armin, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I never wanted to hurt you." He let out a humorless laugh, setting the glass down with deliberate care. "A mistake? That's what you're calling months of lying, sneaking around, and making me a fool in my own home. A mistake?" Maya flinched at the sharpness in his voice. She reached for his hand, but he pulled away, his eyes cold and distant. "You're sorry now because you've been caught," he said. "But you weren't sorry when you were out with him, were you? Did you even think about me? About us?" She shook her head frantically. "It wasn't like that. I was lost. I didn't know how to handle everything, and he—" "Stop." The single word was enough to silence her. Armin's gaze bore into hers, and for the first time, she saw the depth of his pain. "You want to explain?" he said, his voice low and measured. "Fine. Let's talk about explanations. But first, there's something you need to see." Before she could respond, Armin pulled out his phone and tapped the screen a few times. Moments later, her own phone buzzed on the table. Confused, she picked it up and saw a notification. "Armin Khan tagged you in a post?" Her blood ran cold as she opened the app. The post was public, and the photos she had just seen in the envelope were now there for the world to see. The caption read, "A wife's loyalty is priceless. Unfortunately, mine came at the cost of my dignity. Meet Zion, the man she chose over our vows." Maya's heart stopped. The comments were already flooding in. Friends, family, acquaintances, strangers, all reacting with shock, judgment, and curiosity. "Armin!" she cried, standing up so quickly that her chair toppled over. "What have you done?" He crossed his arms, his expression unyielding. "What have I done?" "No, Maya. The question is, what did you do?" "I'm just letting everyone know the truth." She stared at him, her mind racing. The post wasn't just humiliating. It was destructive. Her family would see it. Her colleagues. her boss, her life as she knew it would be over. "Please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "Please take it down. We can talk about this. We can fix this." Armin shook his head. "Fix this? There's nothing to fix, Maya. You destroyed us the moment you let him into our lives. This is just the beginning." The next few days were a blur of chaos. Maya's phone rang incessantly, friends calling to ask what was happening, her family demanding explanations, and even Zion, whose own life had been thrown into turmoil by the sudden exposure. "You need to get him to take it down," Zion said angrily during a phone call. "This is affecting my career, my reputation, everything." "I'm trying," Maya replied, her voice hoarse from crying. "He's not listening to me." "Then try harder," Zion snapped. "Because if he doesn't, I'll handle it myself." Maya hung up, her hands shaking. She felt trapped, suffocated by the weight of her mistakes. Armin, however, was far from done. He had been meticulous in his planning, ensuring that his revenge would leave no stone unturned. One morning, Maya woke up to find a neatly folded stack of papers on the bedside table. It was a divorce petition. Her heart sank as she flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the cold, legal language. Armin wasn't just ending their marriage. He was fighting for everything. The house, the assets, even a clause that demanded she vacate the property within 30 days. When she confronted him, he was unyielding. "You made your choice, Maya," he said. "Now I'm making mine." "But Armin," she pleaded, "I love you. I don't want to lose you." He laughed bitterly. "Love? Don't talk to me about love. You don't even know what it means." The breaking point came when Maya's parents showed up unannounced, their faces etched with a mixture of anger and disappointment. "What have you done, Maya?" her father demanded. "Do you have any idea what people are saying about you? About us?" She broke down, unable to find the words to defend herself. Her mother looked at her with tears in her eyes. "We raised you better than this," she said softly. "How could you throw away everything for this?" Their words cut deeper than any of Armin's actions. She realized then that her betrayal hadn't just hurt him. It had rippled outward, affecting everyone in their orbit. The final blow came during a confrontation with Zion. They met at the same cafe where their affair had begun. But this time, there was no laughter, no light-hearted flirting. "This isn't working," Zion said bluntly, his eyes avoiding hers. "What do you mean?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I mean us. It's too much. Your husband is crazy. Your life is a mess, and I didn't sign up for this." Maya stared at him, stunned. "You said you loved me." "I did," he admitted. "But love doesn't survive in chaos. I can't do this anymore." With that, he stood up and walked away, leaving her alone at the table, her world in shambles. When she returned home that evening, Armin was waiting for her. He handed her a small box without a word and walked away. Inside was her wedding ring, along with a note. "This is where it ends. You can keep the memories. I don't want them anymore." Maya collapsed onto the floor, clutching the ring to her chest as sobs racked her body. In that moment, she realized she had lost everything. Her husband, her lover, her family's respect, and, most painfully, the version of herself she once thought she was. Maya stood in front of the mirror, staring at the reflection of the woman she had become, a stranger with hollow eyes and a broken spirit. The ring that once symbolized her vows now sat in a small box on the vanity, a cruel reminder of everything she had lost. Her phone buzzed, but she didn't bother checking it. It had been weeks since Armin's post, weeks since their last argument, and yet the world around her had not stopped judging. Her friends had unfriended her on social media, colleagues whispered when she walked by, and her family had distanced themselves, too embarrassed to speak of her betrayal. Even Zion, the man she once thought could be her escape, had vanished from her life. Maya had tried reaching out to him multiple times, calls, texts, even visits to his apartment, but each attempt ended in silence. He had made it clear that he wanted nothing to do with the chaos she had brought upon herself. It wasn't just her reputation that had suffered. Armin had filed for divorce, and now the legal process was in full swing. Her lawyer had advised her to accept the terms, but the terms were steep. The house, the assets, Everything they had built together were slipping through her fingers. As the final hearing loomed, Maya had no choice but to face the reality of her situation. She had been emotionally numb for so long, but now, in the quiet moments when the world wasn't screaming at her, she felt the weight of her decisions. The first real encounter with Armin since their confrontation came when they were forced to meet in a mediation session for the divorce. The room was cold, sterile, filled with the distant hum of office air conditioning. Armin was already sitting when she entered, his posture stiff, his jaw clenched. Maya could barely make eye contact. She was ashamed, not just for what had happened between them, but for how she had let everything slip through her fingers. He looked at her, his gaze sharp and unyielding. "You should have thought about this before you started lying." "I know," Maya whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Armin, but please, please let me make it right. I never meant to hurt you." He remained silent for a moment, and she could see the storm raging beneath the surface. His anger, his disappointment, his hurt. But then something shifted. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but a faint glimmer of something. Perhaps resignation. Perhaps just the weariness of dealing with a situation he never asked for. "Make it right?" he repeated, a bitter smile on his lips. "How do you plan on doing that, Maya? How do you undo what you've done?" Her heart raced, but she steadied herself. "I don't know, but I'll start by accepting the consequences. I'll sign whatever you need me to. I need to feel like I'm not losing everything because of one mistake." Armin's eyes softened, just a fraction, but the hardness quickly returned. "One mistake? Is that what you call it?" "I don't have the right to call it anything," she said, lowering her head. "But I've spent the last few weeks thinking about everything, about what I did, about how I've hurt you, and about how I betrayed you. And I know I can't take it back. I can't undo it. But I can start over if you'll let me." For the first time in months, Maya saw a flicker of emotion in Armin's eyes, a mixture of pain and exhaustion. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Maya. What you did. It's not something you can just walk away from." Maya swallowed, trying to keep her tears at bay. "I understand." The legal proceedings continued, and it was clear that Armin wasn't going to back down. The house, the property, and the assets they had built together were gone from her grasp. But what hurt the most was the emotional toll. Her life had been inextricably linked to Armin for years, and now he was a stranger. Someone she had once loved, someone who had once been her world, and now he had become her executioner. Maya had tried everything she could think of, apologies, begging, reasoning, but nothing worked. Armin had closed himself off completely. Outside the walls of her broken marriage, Maya felt the weight of the world's judgment pressing in on her. Her mother had told her, with tears in her eyes, that she couldn't come home anymore. Her father's words had been harsher. "You brought shame to this family. We don't know who you are anymore." Her friends, the ones who had once been her closest allies, no longer spoke to her. They turned their backs the moment the story broke, some even joining in the public condemnation on social media. Her professional life, once thriving, was now at a standstill. Rumors had spread through the office, and colleagues avoided her. Her boss had warned her about the fallout. "I can't have someone with this kind of reputation on the team," he had said. "Not after everything that's come to light." Maya had no choice but to resign. She couldn't bear the constant whispers behind her back. Late one night, as she sat alone in the empty house that once felt like home, Maya came to painful realization. She was truly alone. Armin had exacted his revenge, but it wasn't just the house or the money that she had lost. It was her sense of self, her pride, and her place in the world. She had destroyed everything she once held dear, and there was no undoing it. She sat in the silence of the house, wondering what had become of her. Was she the woman she once thought she was, or had the affair, the lies, and the betrayal erased her entirely? And yet, deep within, there was a small, fragile ember of hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, one day she could rebuild. But she knew that would take time. She would have to face the consequences of her actions, live with the choices she had made, and learn to forgive herself, if that was even possible. Maya's journey, it seemed, was far from over. The consequences of her betrayal had not only torn her marriage apart, but had also scattered the remnants of the life she once knew. She was left standing at the edge of everything, looking into the abyss, wondering if there was a way back. But one thing was clear. Armin's revenge had forever changed her. It was a lesson in pain, loss, and the cruel cost of infidelity. And now, with everything stripped away, Maya would have to rebuild from the ground up, if she could find the strength to do so. The day turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Maya's life, once full of promise and familiarity, had become a distant memory. She had lost everything she had once cherished: her marriage, her career, her friendships, and her self-respect. Yet, somewhere in the pit of her despair, a small glimmer of clarity emerged. She was no longer the woman who had cheated on her husband. She was no longer the woman who had betrayed the man who had loved her unconditionally. She was someone else, someone who would have to rebuild, brick by painful brick, if she wanted to find peace again. It was a cold morning in late winter when Maya received a text from Armin. The message was brief, but its weight felt heavy. Maya stared at the screen, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't heard from him in months, not since the divorce papers had been signed, not since they had gone their separate ways. She had heard from mutual friends that he was dating again, and part of her, though she would never admit it, wondered if he had found a way to heal. But now, this text. It was as if the universe was pushing her towards some inevitable conclusion. Maya sat at the cafe where they had once shared laughter and easy conversations. She had chosen a quiet table by the window, her hands trembling as she wrapped them around the warm cup of coffee. Armin arrived exactly on time, his face a mixture of weariness and resolve. He had changed in subtle ways. His jawline was sharper, his eyes more guarded. His presence was less the man she had known and more someone hardened by experience. He sat down across from her, but neither of them spoke immediately. The silence between them was thick, an almost tangible thing that held them both in place. Maya felt the weight of everything they had been through, everything they had lost. Finally, Armin broke the silence. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," he said, his voice low but steady. "About what happened, about how it all ended. I'm not here to blame you anymore, Maya." Maya's breath caught in her throat, and she looked up at him, unsure if she could trust her ears. "You're not," she whispered. Armin shook his head. "Blame doesn't fix anything. I could never get that satisfaction. But what I've realized is that both of us were lost in our own ways. I was angry, and I used that anger to destroy. But revenge doesn't heal wounds. It only deepens them. It has taken me a long time to understand that." Maya felt her chest tighten. The tension that had defined their relationship for so long seemed to dissipate in that moment, leaving room for something raw and fragile. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, her voice breaking. "But I'm sorry, Armin. I am so sorry. For everything. I know that I can never undo what I've done, but I need you to know that I regret it every single day. I destroyed us, and I would give anything to take it all back." Armin's gaze softened, but there was no rush to give her the forgiveness she so desperately sought. "I've forgiven you," he said, surprising her. "Not because you asked for it, but because holding on to that anger, it wasn't helping me. It wasn't helping either of us." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She had expected many things from this conversation: anger, rejection, bitterness, but forgiveness had never been one of them. "But," Armin continued, his tone shifting, "that doesn't mean we can just pick up where we left off. I'm not sure I'll ever be the same person again. We're both different now. You don't get to undo the damage you've caused, Maya. That's something you'll have to live with." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know. I'll carry this with me for the rest of my life." Months passed since that conversation. Maya spent the next year in a sort of quiet solitude. She had taken time off to focus on herself, attending therapy, seeking out new friends who didn't judge her, and slowly trying to rebuild her career. She had moments of self-doubt, moments when she wondered if she would ever truly redeem herself. She had lost a great deal, but she had also gained something unexpected: clarity. She had seen the full extent of her actions, and now she understood the price of betrayal, not just in the eyes of others, but within herself. Armin, On the other hand, Ad moved on. He had gone through his own journey of healing, though at times he still wrestled with the scars of the past. He had started dating again, but Maya could tell that he, too, was a different man. One who had learned the destructive power of anger and the futility of revenge. His relationship with her had been irrevocably altered, and though they had reconciled to a degree, the bond they once shared had been shattered beyond repair. They would never be the couple they had been, but perhaps that was for the best. Some things weren't meant to last, and some wounds couldn't be fully healed. One evening, Maya sat alone in a park, watching the sunset as Teach's sky turned a deep orange. She had just finished a meeting with a potential client for a new project she was working on, and though the future seemed uncertain, it felt promising. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of peace. In the distance, she saw Armin walking with someone else, laughing in a way that made her heart ache, but also filled her with a strange sense of relief. He had moved on, and so had she. The weight of her past remained, but it no longer defined her. Maya had learned the hard way that redemption wasn't something that came easily. It was something that required time, patience, and, above all, self-forgiveness. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Maya allowed herself a small, bittersweet smile. She had lost many things, but she was still standing. She had survived the storm, and though her future remained uncertain, she now understood that the path to redemption didn't always lead back to the past. Sometimes it was about moving forward, one step at a time.